Good morning, everyone. I will be starting the HUD pro-housing public hearing momentarily, so thank you for joining. Just going to mute until we give some people a little more time to join. Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a couple more minutes to see if to give people an opportunity to join, but thank you for being here. Morning. I hope everyone is staying safe, and we will start in a few minutes. We'll start probably at 5 after, just to give it 2 more minutes for people to pop on. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Kristen Allen with the Atlanta Regional Commission, and I will go ahead and start with our public hearing for the 2024 HUD Pro Housing grant application. So thank you for being here. This will be recorded. So after the meeting, if you have any peers that would like to go back and take a look at this presentation, it will be posted online. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. I'm not sure if everyone has the ability to unmute, but I'll go through the slides and save your questions for the end. And if I need to unmute anyone for comments or questions, I can do so. But if you have the ability to unmute, you can do so during the presentation if you have a pertinent question. So again, my name is Kristen Allen, and this is the public hearing for the Atlanta Regional Commission application for the 2024 HUD Pro Housing Grant. That's the Pathways to Removing Obstacles for Housing grant. This is a grant offered through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The total award amount that's been approved by the federal government is $100 million, and 30 grants will be issued. Approximately 30 grants will be issued from this $100 million. The maximum amount for the application is $7 million, and that is what the ARC, as of right now, intends to apply for the full $7 million for the grant. There is a link here for the application. It's also, if you go to atlantaregional.org, it's on our homepage. It's listed on our homepage as well. So you can go to atlantaregional.org, and there's an icon for the grant that you can click on and get the draft of the grant and the other information related to the grant for ARC. So I'll walk through the deadline. We posted the grant draft on the ARC website on September 16th, and public comments opened the same day. They can be emailed to me or you can call me on my office phone. Those contacts are both listed on the ARC website. The public hearing is today, 9/26, and we will close our public comments on 10/7, on October 7th. The deadline for the grant to be sent into HUD is October the 15th. HUD has 6 goals for the competition. The ones that I wanted to highlight at the high level is that this grant was offered in 2023. ARC did apply and was not awarded, but they have changed the requirements a little bit from 2023 to where they want to reward jurisdictions that have already enacted laws and regulations that will lead to more affordable housing production and preservation. So they shifted this a little bit from breaking down barriers for affordable housing to continuing to break down barriers, but also rewarding actions that have happened or are underway. They also want to institutionalize state and local analysis of effective, equitable, and resilient approaches to affordable housing production and preservation. So they're looking a little bit wider in their geography. They want to further the consolidated plan requirements to identify and remove barriers to affordable housing. And there's a large focus on affirmatively furthering fair housing and addressing and removing barriers that perpetuate segregation, inhibit access to well-resourced areas of opportunity for protected class groups and vulnerable population, and to avoid concentration of affordable housing in under-resourced areas. And they also really want to facilitate collaboration and harness innovative approaches from jurisdictions, including our advocates and our stakeholders in the region. So some of these new requirements for the Pro Housing Grant, they added language encouraging overlapping jurisdictions to partner. And this is important because in 2023, the City of Atlanta and the Atlanta Regional Commission applied separately, and neither of us were awarded grant funding, but we've decided to partner on this. So we do believe that by partnering together that our application will be stronger. They've already also added criteria for reviewing pass-through programs. So that is what ARC will be proposing, is that the federal money passes through the ARC to different jurisdictions and nonprofit entities with the grant. So there is some criteria around the pass-through programs. As I mentioned, the grant also seeks to prioritize applicants who can demonstrate progress and commitment to overcoming these barriers, primarily by having enacted improved laws and regulations. They have also added a definition of geographic scope to ensure that the barriers removed and the progress implemented is both in high opportunity areas and underserved areas. And a strong grant application will have regional implications. This is one thing that we spoke to HUD about with our grant from 2023. We do have a large 11 county region, but they actually are seeking criteria in the grant and progress in the grant that could even move beyond that region. So why the Metro Atlanta area? I think that HUD in our grant, we scored high in our need last time, and I think they recognize the extreme need for grant funding and for affordable housing in the Metro Atlanta region. And some of the statistics that we spoke about last time and that we will update and reiterate again for this grant is that the Metro Atlanta area is experiencing some of the most extreme housing pressures in the nation, that we're growing at a pretty rapid rate. We added almost 70,000 people in 2023. And the Atlanta metro housing market ranks number 3 in the nation in our home price appreciation and number 4 in rental price appreciation. We've lost over 100,000 rental units in the last 7 years, priced between $800 and $1,500 per month. And our increase in the home price has been pretty extreme, and our average sale price is now $472,000 as an average for our 11 county region. We also are emphasizing in this grant the lost equity in home ownership. So home ownership will be a part of this grant that we'll be talking a little bit more about and weaving into the grant. This lost equity in home ownership has been through a combination of home price increases, but also growth in the single-family rental market, particularly in majority Black neighborhoods. This has exacerbated the racial wealth gap, which was already extreme in the Metro Atlanta area, where white families have a median household income of $83,772, while Black families have a median household income of $28,105. So there's a pretty significant wealth gap. Between the increase in home prices and the single-family rental market, predominantly African-American neighbors have lost nearly 4% of total household income due to lost equity from this single-family corporate real estate. And in 2022, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta listed the Atlanta Metro as unaffordable in that the median household income is no longer sufficient to purchase the median price home. So why a regional focus? Across the region, local governments are actively working to address our region's housing needs through revised laws and regulations. We have seen a lot of great movement in our cities, our counties, and the affordable housing space. However, each municipality has arrived at similar barriers in their pursuit of housing progress. So these are the 3 barriers that the ARC, through our application, is really seeking to address. And this is very important for the HUD application because they want to see very clearly defined barriers and how these barriers will be addressed. So the first barrier is the lack of flexible funding capacity at the municipal and county level. So we will primarily be looking at expanding housing trust funds and local funding capabilities, with housing trust funds being kind of our primary activity that we're looking at, but we'll also envelop other funding mechanisms, including education around what funding exists, and bolstering other types such as inclusionary zoning, tax allocation districts, recurring funds. So it'll be kind of this overarching funding, but the main thing will be addressing this lack of flexible funding capacity at the municipal and county level so that cities and counties can be rapid and have the funds to deploy when needed. The second barrier that we'll be seeking to remove is the underutilization of land for housing. Now, every city and county that I talk to speaks about the problem with land, about not having enough land. So we really want to double down and identify and activate vacant and underutilized land. And the primary mechanism to do this is through the expansion of local land banks to acquire, hold, and transfer land for community benefit. There will also be some activities embedded in this, such as pipeline of land development for housing. The third barrier is to address disparities of racial wealth gap and home ownership opportunity. So our third barrier is addressing this home opportunity gap. We want to build upon existing and create new community land trust and shared equity partnerships and models for permanent affordability to address the loss of affordable units and provide ownership opportunities. So encompassing these barriers is the need for additional regional research, development, resources, and education to implement these housing solutions regionally. So these three barriers will be encompassed by ARC's work in this grant that will really be pulling together with our partners, including the City of Atlanta, some of these regional resources, education, and making sure that we have the research at the regional level to activate through all of our different municipalities. So HUD in this grant has identified what they consider to be HUD's priority geographies. So the map on the right shows the 3 counties that are shaded that are their priority counties. And then the red dots indicate any city or place, which includes unincorporated places in the region that are considered HUD priority geographies. So Forsyth, Fulton, and Fayette County are all priority counties. And so our grant has a lot of activation in Fulton County specifically, but we also have a lot of places and cities represented in DeKalb County. So we have some recommendations there in Gwinnett County, as well as Cherokee County. So these are the primary areas that we are seeking to activate with the grant funding to cover a wide geography of places that have already implemented some housing laws and made some changes on their own. So this slide identifies what HUD has said about these spaces. We have 31 priority geography places in 3 counties, and 25 of the places are identified by the off-pace factor, which means that affordable housing is not keeping pace with population. 13 of the places plus 2 of the counties are identified by the housing affordability factor, having a measure of insufficient housing. And then 1 county and 1 place are identified by the housing problems factor, having widespread housing burden or substandard housing. So that's defined by HUD, and those are things that we'll be addressing primarily through the off-pace factor, the affordable housing not keeping pace with population, and the housing affordability factor, having a measure of insufficient housing. There was a participant survey that ARC put out that we referenced in the grant. It's called the Housing Needs and Barriers Assessment. And this was put out to member jurisdictions, and we received 136 responses. And these barriers rose to the top within this survey. So the lack of adequate and flexible funding for land and housing received 89% of the respondents believe that they need to expand incentive programs for affordable housing, and 82% feel that they lack resources for housing. There was also a need, 89%, for insufficient programs to leverage vacant and city-owned land for housing. So the 89% of respondents felt that the need to establish programs for housing land trusts, land banks, and/or housing trust funds. There was also an 89% response rate to the need to establish, support, and expand permanent affordability models, such as community land trust and shared equity models. And then there's also a large percent, 79%, lack resources, education, and broad community representation in housing decisions. So these are the things that we really are focusing in on this grant, and we did see this in the responses from our survey to our member jurisdictions. The ARC has also done research in the consolidated plans to understand kind of how the fair housing barriers and the consolidated plans align with this as well. So on the right, there's the Atlanta and Fulton County Community Survey that represents displacement of residents due to high housing costs, which is something that the permanent affordability model can address. And then that's the highest rated one. And then there are also not enough affordable housing for individuals, not enough affordable housing for families, not enough affordable housing for seniors, and then also limited access to good schools, which speaks to housing in high opportunity areas, which is something that we are addressing in the grant. Other things that came out from the Fulton County Consolidated Plan were increased home ownership, These are just very consolidated. We have more information about the consolidated plans in the grant application itself, but these are some bullets that we pulled out. But in DeKalb County, talking about affordable and for-sale housing for low and moderate income households. City of Canton, support for pathways to home ownership, education, and funding resources. And in Gwinnett County, prioritizing investment of funds to housing programs, increasing tools, and reducing that negative perception of housing. So this will go a little more in depth into the 3 goals that ARC has for the grant. So goal 1 is to increase the supply of housing through identifying, enabling, and expanding local flexible funding sources. The Pro Housing Grant will enable planning and technical support for setting up and expanding housing trust funds, determining additional sources of funding, creating policies and programs for evolving loans and grants. The grant also asks for our lessons learned, so I'll go through a few of those. What we have learned from the lack of funding at the local level is that it's consistently expressed as a top barrier to affordable housing, that this also hurts small and minority developers who suffer disproportionately from a lack of funding, because this local funding can serve as portion of the capital stack and can actually help us incentivize and ensure that small developers can be at the table. And existing housing trust funds are typically funded through allocations of general funds. I know that there have been some that have been funded by ARPA funding, which is kind of reaching the end of its line, but the general funds allocation is typically how they're funded. And this may vary due to economic and political changes. Another way that housing trust funds are typically funded is in lieu fees, which are only allocated when a developer elects to provide fees instead of building affordable units. So in lieu fees are part of inclusionary zoning. So if a city has the inclusionary zoning policy in place, typically they will give a developer the option to either build affordable units in a new development or pay into the housing trust fund. So in lieu fees are also, they're not as reliable as we would like, because a lot of times the developers actually elect to build the units instead of putting money into the trust fund. So this is a barrier that we've identified, and we understand that the ARC can contribute to research to understand what other funds could be put into the Housing Trust Fund, which may require changes at the municipal, the county, and even the state level to allow those funds to be put into the Housing Trust Fund, and to ensure that there is a recurable funds into the Housing Trust Fund that can build that up. And also that we help through technical assistance, the ARC can help establish procedures and policies that disseminate those or distribute those funds through revolving loans or grant programs. So to make sure not only that the Housing Trust Fund is set up and funded, but there are policies and procedures in place to be able to put those funds out where, where there's best need and where that specific community needs to allocate those funds for low and moderate income housing. So below are the geographies that we've identified for grant funding for the Housing Trust Fund creation or expansion. This is DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, the City of Canton, Clarkston, and Decatur. Clarkston and Decatur already have a Housing Trust Fund set up, but they may need some extra help with the funds going into the trust funds and some of the policies and procedures, whereas the other 3 are looking and evaluating whether or not to set up a trust fund and will need help putting that in place and looking at the procedures. Goal number 2 is create new affordable housing supply by identifying and activating vacant public and private land for housing. The Pro Housing Grant will support creation and expansion of land banks through technical support. This initiative will enable cities and counties to set up new land bank or joining an existing one, identify vacant or deteriorated land for the purpose of allocating to the land bank, develop a pipeline of parcels suitable and preferred for housing, and support pre-development work for pilot projects that will demonstrate success regionally. Some of the lessons learned: that Georgia is actually very progressive in its land banking. The Metro Atlanta Land Bank is in its 30th year of operation, and it's expanding its footprint outside of the city of Atlanta. I believe the Metro Atlanta Land Bank was the 4th set up in the country, and Georgia is very friendly to land banks. So this is a great place for us to look at expanding and take this model that the Metro Atlanta Land Bank has set up and ensure that the successes of that land bank are expanded into other counties, where the other counties would be setting up their own unique land banks. It would not necessarily be an expansion of the Metro Atlanta Land Bank into other counties. It would be setting up land banks in each county so that that county would have its own jurisdiction. However, the Metro Atlanta Land Bank is now expanding to take in cities within Fulton County into the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. I know that interest has been expressed by the city of South Fulton in joining that, and there may be others in Fulton County. So this grant would help expand the Metro Atlanta Land Bank into these other cities in Fulton County, as well as create land banks in other counties. So the geographies identified for land bank creation or expansion are DeKalb County, Cherokee County, the city of Canton, which may end up joining the Cherokee County Land Bank, the city of Clarkston, and the city of South Fulton. And then additionally, proposed funding to the Metro Atlanta Land Bank to help expand and bring other cities into that land bank. Goal 3 is reducing the wealth gap and preventing displacement through expanding permanent affordability. The grant will enable municipalities and counties to build upon new and revised zoning laws to pilot innovative housing types that are permanently affordable through community land trust model and nonprofit partnerships. So lesson learned here is the community land trust model was born in Georgia. New Communities, Inc. was the very first community land trust in the nation. And it provides both permanent affordability and community control. So the land trust model has really emerged recently, and I believe over the last 10 years or so, as the model for permanent affordability. As many of you know, a lot of times with affordable housing, it is time bound. So there is a period in time in which the affordability lapses and it needs to either be renewed or it's vulnerable to being purchased or taken over and turned to market rate housing. The land trust model and also shared equity models in general, which include co-housing, those are the best to put this housing in community control, to have the community make decisions about the housing and to have a say in the housing, and to provide for that permanent affordability through a 99-year ground lease that is renewed after that 99-year period. So address housing needs, the community land trust and shared equity models must scale up. Geographies identified for community land trust creation or expansion include DeKalb County, the city of Canton, the city of Decatur, and the city of Clarkston. In addition to those projects in specific cities and counties, this grant seeks to scale up that shared equity model regionally and beyond. And I think this is a really important part of the grant is the community land trust model, the shared equity model. It is expandable. So the Atlanta Land Trust has already looked at expanding their model by allowing a stewardship expansion where they would not only steward and manage their own properties in the Atlanta Land Trust, but they would have the capability to steward properties for other land trusts that might not have that capability or might not want to scale up to that point. So that is one way that we are looking to expand this. The People's Community Land Trust, which is part of the Guild in Atlanta, has done some really great and innovative work around purchasing an apartment building for affordable housing. So they have purchased an apartment building, and the residents actually own and will manage that apartment building in the future. So part of the People's Community Land Trust vision is to not only take this model and expand it through home ownership and rental and businesses, but to really propel that community ownership and community investment in that project through education so that community members are educated to learn how to be property managers of their own properties, that there is lender education wrapped into that so that lenders understand the tools that are available to them and how to really work with the community land trust model, and also to develop a kind of a workforce program around the community land trust model to ensure that these properties can be repaired and maintained. So there is kind of this innovative workforce model that the grant will address to understand that we not only need to put community land trusts in place, we need to have people who can run these properties, who can repair these properties. And so we will lean into that with this grant if awarded. The Decatur Land Trust has some innovative properties that they're looking at. So there will be some pre-development costs looped into that. And the Gwinnett Housing Corporation is really also at the forefront of some of the community land trust work. So they'll be looking at how a housing authority and a community land trust can interact together, which is really exciting work for this grant to explore. Even at a broader scale, the Atlanta Land Trust has proposed the development of a Southeast Regional Land Trust Coalition. So this would take the land trust model wider than even the state, so that we could have a coalition of land trusts in bordering states as well, and really take this step to boost this land trust model in the Southeast region, understand how we can address funding, how do we better address funding for these models, expand these models, educate, so to really lean into this model. I've already mentioned the expansion of the Atlanta Land Trust to provide the stewardship and the increased education for property owners to self-manage shared equity housing through the People's Community Land Trust. But this is this is a broad goal for us with the grant if it's awarded, and also a very important one that we're excited about regionally. And just a second, I'm having a little trouble forwarding my screen. Okay, so the ARC application, regional research and tools. So as I said, this is not explicitly in one of the top 3 goals, but this overarching research and tools by the ARC will help expand some of these regionally. So the first bullet here is expanding research and affordable housing planning resources for member jurisdiction. So the ARC proposes regional resource development so that cities and counties who want to create funding mechanisms, land banks, and community land trusts have access to best practices. The ARC will also incorporate lessons from pilot projects that are proposed herein. So there are different pilot projects in the different cities and counties that I mentioned that the ARC will help with pre-development costs, and we will follow these pilot projects and help inform model ordinances hosted at the ARC as part of our Metro Atlanta Housing Strategy tool. Through a partnership with the City of Atlanta, we will also really dive into ADU pre-designs and expedited permitting, so that this is a pilot project that can also be expanded regionally. The grant will fund research as resources to address barriers, including funding that we mentioned, funding allocations to housing trust funds, property assessments for affordable housing and community land trusts, taxation of CLT properties, tax relief or exemption for affordable properties, and lender education. So there'll be this kind of educational arm through this 6-year grant that will address some of these items that we need to research and provide education on. And then the City of Atlanta is piloting a City of Atlanta tenant portal. So this will also be something that will be expanded to connect affordable housing to those who need it. So we've recognized in the region that we can create affordable housing, but it's not always easy for people to know what is out there. So this is a way for us to pilot something that would connect people with affordable housing. And then lastly, community engagement and convening. Throughout this whole process of this grant, if it's awarded, we want to ensure that the ARC assists with community engagement and education. So grant funding will also provide convenings for cities and counties, for the community, for housing authorities and nonprofits, and will document and market successes to inform the broader region. So we'll not only convene at the regional level, but we'll be going into these communities and providing community engagement. So this is just a chart that I put together to summarize where we are. So these are the cities and counties, and I have a separate slide for the land trusts and the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. But for the linking the grant funding with goals, the different organizations, including DeKalb County, we haven't had anything from Cobb County yet, but we're having conversations with them to see if there's anything that can be added there, because they have done some good housing work. Cherokee County, Gwinnett County, City of Atlanta, City of South Fulton, City of Clarkston, City of Decatur, City of Canton, and Gwinnett Housing Corporation. So you can see that several of these are seeking help with housing trust funds, several with land banks, several of them with community land trusts. We have different entities that would have expressed the need to identify that land pipeline. We have pre-development costs for specific parcels of land that need to be activated for affordable housing at that low and moderate income level. and then additionally who have expressed the need to have funding research for these different capabilities. And just to go a little bit broadly into it, DeKalb County has established the need for technical support to look into and potentially establish a housing trust fund, to research funding sources as a potential to leverage bonding in the future, technical support for development of a land trust, expand the capacity for the DeKalb Land Bank, identify a pipeline of land for the land bank, and to fund the pre-development of identified pilot projects to showcase innovative housing. Cherokee County has expressed the need for potential technical support to establish a land bank, identify a land pipeline, and pilot county projects using pre-development funding. Gwinnett County has expressed the need for technical support for a feasibility study for a housing trust fund, identify a land pipeline, and pre-development costs for 5 identified parcels. The City of Atlanta has expressed the need to support the creation and regional expansion of a tenant portal and the ADU design and build procurement for pre-approval designs. The City of Clarkston has expressed the need for technical support and research for establishing housing trust funds for the established housing trust fund, research for additional funding resources, establish policies and procedures to allocate funding to affordable housing, potentially to join the DeKalb Land Bank, and to establish a land trust for anti-displacement and preservation, as well as to establish new home ownership opportunities. The City of Decatur has expressed the need for research on funding opportunities for a housing trust fund, technical support to establish mechanisms for allocating funds to affordable housing, research to assist the Decatur Land Trust in pre-development of city-owned land for housing, and the City of Canton has expressed the need for technical support, policies, and procedures to join the potential Cherokee Land Bank when established, identify a land pipeline, identify funding resources for the Housing Trust Fund, establish procedures to allocate funding, feasibility for a land trust, and pre-development work for 2 identified pilot projects. The Gwinnett Housing Corporation / Live Norcross Corporation has expressed the need for technical support to establish a land trust and pre-development work for 8 identified parcels. And before I go into the different land trust objectives for the grant, I do want to point out that the grant, we are asking for the full $7 million. We may not be funded that full amount if we are awarded in the first place. We may not be funded that full amount. So we also will be expressing kind of our the top things that we feel need to be funded, and we will have to address in the grant what may need to be removed if the full funding amount is not allocated. So although this is our wish list for the grant, this does not mean that all of these items will necessarily be funded if we are awarded the grant, in the first place. So just to make that clear, but to go into the different land trusts and the Metro Atlanta Land Bank, we have the Atlanta Land Trust, the People's Community Land Trust, and the Decatur Land Trust, and then we also have the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. So we've identified the options of the land bank and land pipeline creation, development, or kind of partnering with the pre-development costs for identified parcels and the development of programs and policies. This is a little bit wordy, but I'll just walk through this so everyone understands where we are with the land trust proposals. So the Atlanta Land Trust has identified 3 primary activities that will benefit the region and beyond through the pro-housing grant funding. That is the establishment of that Southeast Regional Community Land Trust Coalition that I discussed, that would be not only the state of Georgia, but it could bring in states from the surrounding Southeast region to really bolster the land trust. The second is to create and expand the Atlanta Land Trust Stewardship Services model. So that would be the ability for the Atlanta Land Trust to actually assist other land trusts with stewardship of properties. And number 3 would be to accelerate the supply of permanently affordable homes through technical support and pre-development assistance for targeted properties that are not yet activated. So that bolstering of those target properties will help the Atlanta Land Trust as they really ramp up to be a self-sustaining entity. The People's Community Land Trust has identified 4 primary activities to build programs to stabilize residents and expand the shared equity model best practices to a wider geographical region. Some of this falls into the research that I talked about that would be primarily flowing through ARC with help of these partners such as the People's Community Land Trust, which is education to address a lack of knowledge to regional CDFIs about HUD programs, including the 223F and the 213 programs, which some of the CDFIs that they have worked with don't know about these programs or know how to incorporate them. And these programs can actually help lower interest rates for project funding and could be a huge help regionally to community land trusts that are seeking funding for projects at lower interest rates. So to kind of educate and raise awareness around those programs. The second is to increase community education and large scale engagement. So this is not only to just let people know what a land trust is, but to really engage with the community about why they may want to be part of a land trust, how it would benefit them, why the model where they own their home or maybe their condo unit, but not necessarily the land underneath, how that contributes to stability, community control, and long-term affordability. So that education is a really important component of the land trust model. The third is technical assistance and training resources for participating community residents so they can coach them in property management and stewardship of their properties. So for example, the apartment building that is owned by residents in the co-op model, how they actually would property manage that themselves instead of hiring out a third-party property management company. And then kind of in conjunction with that, number 4 is developing an ongoing repair program for existing co-ownership models that will expand workforce development and partnerships. So this would be participating with local colleges and training programs in repair so that they could also not only steward their properties, but ensure that they stay up to date in the long term. And then lastly, actually, I think I have one more after this. The Metro Atlanta Land Bank facilitate the creation of active land banks in the region. So this would be just funding through the Metro Atlanta Land Bank, like I mentioned, to expand in Fulton County so that they could have the funding to assist other cities that want to join the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. So this would be assisting with policies and procedures, technical assistance to help develop that pipeline of property, and then education, just general education for local governments. This could be through a convening governments, communities, and stakeholders for how land is actually brought into the land bank and establish the guidelines and support for the land banking process. So the grant funding, just as a summary, proposed recipients. So if the grant funding is awarded to the ARC, the following recipients are proposed. The funding amounts are subject to change depending on the grant award amount, and we are still kind of identifying the specific funding for each of these areas, and that will be included in the HUD budget sheet, which is submitted at the time of the application. So that's the specific amounts are something that we're working on now and will be submitted as part of the budget sheet for the grant. So the total funding request is $7 million, and the proposed grant and subgrant recipients are the Atlanta Regional Commission, the City of Atlanta, the City of Canton, City of Clarkston, City of Decatur, the City of South Fulton, potentially in conjunction with the Metro Atlanta Land Bank for joining that land bank, Cherokee County, DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, the Gwinnett Housing Corporation, Live Norcross Corporation, Atlanta Land Trust, Decatur Land Trust, and the Guild / the People's Community Land Trust and the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. So the project funding, the post-project funding would follow the ARC's model of subgrant disbursement similar to the Livable Centers Initiative and the Community Development Assistance Program. These are two programs that the ARC has run for. The LCI program has been run for over 25 years. So ARC is very skilled at distributing funds in this manner. So the funds would flow through the ARC as they typically do for the LCI program. And the LCI or the ARC would award the pro housing grant dollars to local jurisdictions or to a nonprofit entity. The ARC serves as the project manager and oversees the project, but that project scope, when once agreed upon, is carried out by the nonprofit or the jurisdiction through the RFP process, typically by consultant teams. So then they could, they could bring in other entities such as a Grounded Solutions Network, such as the Metro Atlanta Land Bank, such as a consulting team, depending on the project, to complete that. So this is something that is established in ARC, and we feel very confident about running the funds through this type of program. In addition, the ARC is consistently convening and providing education along with our partner entities. So that is a component that will help with the research, the education, the convenings that I mentioned in the previous slides. So the timeline for typical LCI projects, which is what I believe will align with the funding, the pro-housing funding, is shown here. So there's kind of a month 1 through 8 where the scope is finalized. There are contract developments. If necessary, there's an RFP. Consultant is selected, and then the consultant is confirmed by ARC, and then the project kicks off after months 8, and then months 9 through 24 will be this when the project begins. Typically, there's the steering committee and community engagement work that is very vital to these projects, draft recommendations, and a final draft. So the projects last 2 years. So we'll be looking at this type of timeline for the different projects that I've identified for the cities and counties, and some of the education projects. This is a 6-year grant, so some of these projects will be staggered over that 6-year period. Some will start earlier, some may start later, and within that there will be convenings, resource development, pilot project development with the pre-development costs. So we'll have a full timeline set in the grant of how these will all flow together. But the typical projects that we're looking at probably will last around 2 years, with the exception of some of the larger research and technical assistance projects that I've identified. I'd like to touch on the climate and equity. So fair housing and equity and climate are also a big part of this grant. So the map on the right overlaps the ARC region, the priority cities, places, and counties in the region with the climate and economic justice screening tool. So you can see that we've really looked at this and thought about, within Fulton County and City of Atlanta, some of these areas that will be activated by the grant with the different technical projects that the City of Atlanta is looking at for the grant, as well as the Community Land Trust and the Metro Atlanta Land Bank work in that county. We also have an area identified up in Canton. So that is one reason that we're prioritizing Cherokee County and Canton is for the work in that area around housing trust funds, possibly some land banking, the pipeline of land development, really bolstering up their existing housing trust fund that they have in Canton, and just furthering the work that they're doing. So there's some great work happening in both Atlanta and up in Canton. There's also some great work happening in DeKalb County that we are seeking to bolster. Clarkston is identified, as well as some other areas in DeKalb County. And then we also have areas of high opportunity identified in this grant. There are some areas of City of Atlanta, as well as City of Decatur, and some other areas that are identified in this grant as high opportunity areas, where we want to continue to ensure that people of low and moderate income can live in areas of high opportunities as we provide opportunities in areas that are considered lower climate and economic justice areas. So just to go through some of the bullets that I have here, we want to make sure that we have the people have meaningful opportunity to participate in decision-making processes for a healthy environment. We want to be able to connect pilot projects with federal and state funding to ensure climate resilient and equity focus, and ensure these green standards are incorporated into affordable developments. And we also want to touch on the affirmatively furthering fair housing part of this grant. This is a big part of the grant as well. Affirmatively furthering fair housing means taking meaningful actions that not only overcome patterns of segregation, but foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict opportunity based on protected characteristics. So we're looking at addressing these disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity. The way that we feel that ARC can help do this with our partner organizations and with all of the people listed in the grant is to really lean into the community land trust and shared equity models that promote community ownership and control, to utilize land banking to clear titles, collaborate with community land trusts and shared equity models, to utilize our housing trust funds to build funding resources to leverage community housing benefits, to collaborate and increase collaborations between cities, counties, nonprofit developers, and housing authorities to leverage HUD funding, federal and state dollars, to expand these shared equity concepts, to grow them regionally, even beyond Georgia, and to educate residents to inform greater community control, which could be through property management, understanding that community benefit of CLTs, and workforce development. Leverage partner funding is also something that has scored pretty high on this grant. We did not have any leverage funding for our application in 2023. We've been working really hard with our partners to secure leverage for this grant. So leverage is not necessarily a match. It is similar to a grant match, but this would be funding that is already allocated for affordable housing projects that could be amplified through this grant work. So points are awarded, I think it's 10 points are awarded based on the amount of leverage funding provided. So the highest number of points is if we can get 50% of the grant leverage. So our goal is $3.5 million in leverage. As of September 23rd, our grant leverage amount is up to $1.795 million. So we are on our way and still seeking support and commitment letters from some of our different organizations that we're working with, but they are working very hard on their end to get that approved and through their councils in this condensed time period that we have for this grant. ARC will finalize leveraged amounts, letters of support, and specific project funding by October 4th. So our deadline for the leverage and for letters of support is October 4th. The Pro Housing Grant due date is October 15th. Awards are expected in February of 2025, and funds must be expended by September 30th, 2030. So the grant runs from February 2025 to September 30th of 2030. So regional accomplishments that we are seeking with the pro-grant funding, local, as I mentioned, our accomplishments that we are seeking are to set up housing trust funds, to establish or join land banks, identify land for housing, establish shared equity, community land trust, pre-development for pilot projects. Regionally, we want to research funding resources for housing trust funds and collaborative funding across federal, state, and local levels. We want to create new tools and resources at the regional level, including this housing portal through the City of Atlanta, model ordinances, and best practices. And statewide and beyond, we want to inform broader funding needs and resources that are applicable statewide, specifically with the Housing Trust Fund needs and some of the other funding we discussed. And we want to really lean into the community land trusts and look at forming this regional land trust coalition to broaden that entity. So we are in the public comment period for this grant, and you can email your public comments to me to kallen@atlantaregional.org. You can also view the ARC application at this link, the public hearing and public comment period for the FY24 ARC HUD Pro Housing Grant. This is linked on the Atlanta Regional's website, atlantaregional.org. So if you just go to the Atlanta Regional's homepage, you can find our grant application and click through to that. And we will also post these slides on that page. So we will have our slides posted, our recording posted there, and we will have a draft application posted there for you to take a look at. But would love to get your comments. I'll go ahead and stop sharing now. And thank you very much for being here again. And if there are any public comments, I'll take those now, or you can also feel free to email them to me. My phone number is also listed on the ARC website if you would like to call me to discuss.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone for being here today. So I'll open up. We only have about 7 minutes left. You do have my contact for public comments as well. I see there's a hand raised from Candace Jordan, so I'll start there. Candace, if you want to unmute.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Kristen, for providing that overview. I think it's absolutely a strong opportunity to leverage existing models that have been successful to expand our opportunities around affordable housing. One thing I want to ask about is it's clear that production is not a huge part of this opportunity, and so I was curious if you anticipate that resources would flow from the grant recipients down to other nonprofit organizations that are in this space? And if so, how do you think that might impact your ability to report success through the course of this grant?
Yeah, that's a great question, Candace. And, the grant amount being $7 million maximum, when we really looked at this, we felt that production itself is probably not the highest and best use just because of the limited number of units that would be able to be created with production with that $7 million. And so we believe at ARC that taking a longer range view of what systems need to be put in place and bolstered through the grant funds will help not only the people that we mentioned in the grant, but all of our amazing partners regionally, including Habitat for Humanity, who do such great work. I mean, we have a lot of great partners. We have Habitat for Humanity, ANDP. There are so many great MicroLife, Urban Oasis Development, so many great small developers and other emerging developers that really need to do this work. And I think what we recognize is that there is a barrier in land, first of all. So that is where the land banking comes into play. We need to identify land throughout the region, and then we need to do the work to understand what land can be activated for housing and what land needs to be activated for housing, because we can identify the land, but the communities want to put all that land to the highest and best use. So it may be a combination of parkland, housing. There could be different, uses for that land. So not only to identify the vacant land out there or the underutilized land, but to really pinpoint where we can activate housing. So that's one way we feel like we can benefit all of our partners, is just through that identification work. The second way is through the funding, the general funding. So we really talked a lot about housing trust funds. There are other funding mechanisms out there that we want to explore. If not through directly the grant, we would continue to explore those through the ARC's LCI and CDAP programs. Through the grant, we really want to look at the housing trust funds, understand what funds other states are using to kind of have recurring funds into this, into the housing trust fund. I know that some states use hotel motel taxes, some use fees, some use real estate transfer taxes. Some of these are not allowed in the state of Georgia. So to put this money into that research to understand what's our best and highest use, what's going to work regionally, what are different options for local jurisdiction, what do we need to kind of help our partners at the state really take a hard look at to benefit not only our region, but the state. But I think if we can get that land identified, we can get these resources set up through housing trust funds, and then we can also have policies and procedures for jurisdictions to put these funds out into these projects. I think that will help in a broad sense. So, and I'd love to get your feedback on, through Habitat, if you feel like those are barriers that you think would help address Habitat for Humanity's needs as well, because we do want this to be broad and to influence, our partners as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that land is a huge barrier. And our biggest barrier is keeping up with the production. So backfilling our own portfolio of land to keep with the amount of production that we complete each year. So I definitely am excited to hear more about how this could trickle down to opportunities for us to be able to leverage so that we can continue to do our great work in partnership with you all.
Yeah, one thing I did want to mention too, some of the research, I think that especially that the People's Community Land Trust has raised could be influential as well. So kind of broadening that research base so that our lenders really understand some of the different models and how best to lend for them. So I think there's some knowledge base for that, and some of the federal funds and how to best leverage those. So, to kind of take this broad look at how the different funding sources can work. I know that Cherokee County mentioned they use a lot of their CBGG funds to activate toward housing. That's an important resource. I don't think that we are utilizing that to the highest and best level for housing in the region. So those are the types of things we'll be looking at with the grant. And I think, at the onset of the grant, forming, committees to really drive this work is going to be important, because we'll need to hear from, if we get the grant. I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but if we do get the grant, to kind of have these committees formed to help us, as we drive this, is going to be really important. So we will definitely be looking to all of our partners to participate in that conversation.
Awesome.
Ilka Davidson, thank you. Thank you for your question. Ilka, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, and this may be a longer conversation to have offline, but there's a big element of this proposal that is capacity building for both CLTs and land banks, and I was intrigued by the proposed model of having the Atlanta Land Trust, which is the oldest and most capable land trust, provide kind of back office services to more fledgling land trusts in the form of stewardship. And I'm wondering, stewardship services, and I'm wondering if there's been any conversations on the land bank front about the possibility of structuring something like that. Because although the Atlanta Fulton County Land Bank's been up and around for 30 years, their first decade at least, they were not very effective at all. And I know here in DeKalb County, we've had a land bank for 5, 7 years, which has not been able to really get itself off the ground. And I'm wondering if there's anything that's allowed within the kind of jurisdictional framework of the Metro Atlanta Land Bank that would enable them for a fee to provide some of the services, whether that's property management or land acquisition services or dealing with the tax commissioner, that a lot of fledgling land banks might not have the capacity, the staffing or the capacity to do while they're in this kind of early fledgling stage.
Yeah, that's a great question too, Elka. And that's something that I've spoken a good bit about with Chris Norman. And I know that right now their focus is on expanding within Fulton County. So I think that most of their energy through this grant term will be in seeking, which cities in Fulton County want to join the land bank and need that pipeline development so they can assist those. And there is the Georgia level coalition of land banks that Chris Norman also works with as well. And so I see this as twofold because I see some funding going to the Metro Atlanta Land Bank to help kind of bring in those other cities in Fulton County. But we're also looking at how funding can flow directly to the cities and counties, specifically DeKalb County and Cherokee County, that want to set up their own land bank, so that they can, through partnerships with people at the Metro Atlanta Land Bank or through the Georgia Land Bank Coalition, or potentially even through consultants, use that funding to do that work separately. So I don't foresee the Metro Atlanta Land Bank kind of getting into that space right now, but I think if there's funding through the cities or through the counties that want to do that, there could be an agreement where there's some assistance from them, as on a kind of more of a consulting basis. So I think that's something we'd still have to probably flesh out, if we get the grant awarded, kind of flesh out exactly, who that consulting firm would be for those cities and counties. But we anticipate probably the Georgia one taking the lead on that consulting work, potentially with the Metro Atlanta Land Bank being at the table to make sure that they're sharing the best practices.
Got it. Thank
But
you.
the Atlanta Regional Commission could be a great place to kind of hold these best practices as well, so that we make sure that there's a regional space where we take these lessons and hold them. So, but thank you. That was a great question. We are at 10:02. Does anyone else have a question for me for the grant? Okay, seeing none, you have my email. We would love to get some further comments in. So if you have organizations that you work with outside of this group here, we would love for you to reach out to them and try to drive some comments, because we do post the public comments in our grant. And I think that contributes to the viability of the grant and whether or not we'll get the application. So the more comments we can get from you, from your organizations, from your peers, anyone that you work with, the better. So help us spread the word.
Thanks, Kristen. Totally
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
all your work putting this together. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day, and everyone stay safe.
Thanks, Kristen. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you, Carrie, for coming in. I'm so sorry again you had to go in today. But I feel good that it's done. I wish more people had joined, but I'm glad that it's done. So.
We got some people, so it's good and good comments. Anyway, so go back to vacation. Thanks.
Okay.
For
All right.
presentation.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.